Continuing on page 50, House Bill 2313, an act to amend, repeal, and reenact myriad of sections of the Code of Virginia, as well as chapters of the Acts of Assembly of 2009 and 2012 relating to revenues and appropriations primarily for transportation. Passed the House February 5th. Congress report adopted by the House February 22nd. The governor's recommendations are before the body.
The gentleman from Suffolk, Mr. Jones.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this little bill, technical in nature, the substitute that's before you. Just kidding. There's no sense of humor at this time of afternoon. I'm like the delegate, the majority leader. My timing is not very good, I guess. House Bill 2313, the amendments that are in front of you are in the form of a substitute. What the substitute does, it makes technical amendments that were suggested by Tax, VDOT, and the many agencies that deal with the collection and distribution of taxes and dollars throughout the Commonwealth. What these adjustments to the bill will do are the following. There is a reduction in the titling tax from 4.3% to 4.15%. There is a reduction in the alternative fuel vehicle fee from $100 to $64. A reduction in the Northern Virginia Planning District 8 region of the grantor's fee from 0.25 cents to 0.15 cents per hundred. And reduction in NOVA and the transient occupancy tax from 3% to 2%. So there are 4 reductions that are included in this bill, from the 25 to the 15 cents, the 3 to the 2% on the TOT, and the 4.3 to 4.15, and then the 100 to 64. There were also some questions that were raised as to the constitutionality of the implementation of the 2 regional components. And so there are changes in this bill that reflect that. The jurisdictions are no longer named. It is by planning district and based on certain criteria, certain metrics. There are technical amendments and cross-references to code sections that were missed. There is amendment language about leaking for underground storage tanks. And what I did have provided to you is a 2-pager front and back that goes over the various amendments that are before you. The revenue at the end of year 5, is being reduced from $3.5 billion to $3.4 billion for the statewide component, and for the Northern Virginia regional component from $1.7 billion to $1.6 billion. There are no changes in the revenues that would be accrued to the Hampton Roads region, and there were no changes to the minimum titling tax fee that you would pay if I bought a car from the gentleman from Rockbridge. Right now it's a $35 minimum fee. It will go to $75. I'll be glad to answer any questions with regards to the substitute, but I know there are people who would like to speak to this, and with that I will sit down, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Speaking against the substitute, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you very much. If the members will look at the narrative on the bill history of 2313, you will find that the last time there was an economic impact or fiscal impact statement was February 4th. This is April 3rd, 2 months later. We still don't know what the amounts of money will be generated will be. And the only source I have is what is here in the internet narrative. This is very much like Washington, D.C., where they don't know what they're doing. You have to pass the bill to find out what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, you also should look at this here because you're setting up future tax increases for which nobody has to go on record within any proximate time that the tax is increased. Why do I say that? Because in order to avoid some constitutional infirmities that were attended upon the initial passage of 2313, conditions were put in, thresholds were put in that matched certain administrative districts of the Commonwealth. Right now, 2 districts, administrative districts in the Commonwealth match this, one in Tidewater, one in Northern Virginia. Richmond right now meets one of the conditions for transit riders. When the Richmond area increases population to a certain point, at some point, this tax is going to be imposed. Who's going to announce that it's imposed? I don't know. Is it the controller? Is it the governor? There's no mechanism in here for doing this. Is it the Census Bureau, which will announce the results of the census? And if an area falls out of a population base, who announces or notifies that the tax disappears. It's very interesting, Mr. Speaker. A lot of us on this side of the aisle criticized Mr. Obama for putting a tax in his Affordable Care Act that affected homeowners who made $200,000 or more and whose house sold for $250,000 or more. They pay 3.48% on the excess of $250,000. We are taxing, Republicans are taxing a person who sells a $90,000 condominium in Northern Virginia if you make $20,000 a year. Mr. Obama is less avaricious and grasping of the taxpayers' money than the Republicans here are. That is very curious. Now, Mr. Speaker, you also have to understand, or should be concerned, that we are delegating more and more authority over more and more of the public purse to authorities which are virtually invisible to the public at large. The Northern Virginia Transportation Authority even has the ability to invest money in securities. If they can't spend it fast enough, this body at some point gave them the ability to do that. Nobody here can mention I think, mention one or two members of the NVTA in Northern Virginia, and I'm a state legislator. Most of you can't do that. How is this money going to be spent? It is unaccountable, and it is even unknowable right now as to what it will produce. We should be not going down this path, Mr. Speaker, because we are increasing unaccountable government. And like I say, at some point in the future, when these thresholds are met, the population in an administrative area is going to be surprised. They can't blame anybody or point to anybody who increased their taxes. Somebody will say, oh, that happened 8 years ago. Surprise, this is not the kind of government that we should have. And in addition, in Northern Virginia, we're paying about 2.5 times more than anybody else in the Commonwealth for the same road that's produced. That is an unfair burden on Northern Virginia taxpayers, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, just to cause a little bit of a cloud on the horizon, I'm researching some cases. I think there is one long time ago where it says that parts of the Commonwealth cannot gang up on a smaller part of the Commonwealth to impose taxes. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from Rockridge, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman from Suffolk resume the floor for a series of questions?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
The gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the gentleman, I want to thank him for his handout and referencing the regional boundary issue. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, isn't it correct that the planning district commissions are not defined in code? In fact, they are designations that are created regulatorily and filed with the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Mr. Speaker, I would say to the gentleman that as far as I know, the PDCs have been around for probably several generations, and as to their formation, I am not keenly aware of how they were formed in the beginning, and I would take him at his word if that's what he says is the way in which they are determined. What I do know is that I don't believe there's been a change to a PDC for probably, some time, maybe 20 years.
Further question, Mr. Speaker.
Will the gentleman yield? Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, and being a regulatory function, isn't it true that the makeup of these different PDCs can change with votes of the member county governments of each of the members of the PDC?
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman, I would assume that is the case, and I'll give him for example. When I was City Council in Suffolk, we established the Western Tidewater Regional Jail with member communities, and the four that agreed to join that agreed to do so under certain conditions. And I think the bill that is before us, the reason that I think it works is because we have the TPO in Hampton Roads, the HR TPO, actually considering and ranking and then making sure that the money that is raised in that region is spent by those individuals who are well aware of the needs of the communities involved.
Further question, Mr. Speaker.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir, I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, it's my understanding that the governor's replaced the geographic boundaries for Northern Virginia and Tidewater with the three-step criteria for those areas that have a population above 1.2 million, a population that has a planning district that has above 1.5 million vehicles, and a planning district that has over 15 million transit riders per year. Is that not correct?
I don't believe that is correct. I think it's 1.5 million people, 1.2 million registered vehicles. But yeah, I would agree with the gentleman that there are 3 criteria that are included in here that reference if in fact you meet those criteria, then that's why the inclusion of the 2 regions is in 2313.
Further question, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yield.
I yield, yes, sir.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, since there is nothing to stop 2 planning districts from combining other than a vote of each of the member counties of each planning district, would it not be possible for, say, the Roanoke Planning District Commission and the Lynchburg Planning District Commission, if combining met these criteria, to simply vote to combine, and then their taxes would be raised according to the increases in this bill?
I would say to the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, that is certainly possible, but I don't think it's probable.
Further question, Mr. Speaker.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, isn't it true that 2 planning districts did combine in the Hampton Roads area about a decade ago?
I believe, Mr. Speaker, I believe it was further than that. I think it was when I was still in local government. I think we had the Peninsula and we had the Hampton Roads, Southampton Roads, and there was certainly a need to get beyond the regional competition where we were losing opportunity to sister states. And so I think that they sat down, the leaders of the community, I believe they had a series of public hearings, and they decided it was in the best interest of the Commonwealth and the regions to come together as one.
I thank the gentleman.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Surville.
Speaking to the amendments, Mr. Speaker, or the substitute.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I have an announcement. Just wanted to let everybody know that I'm not shaving until the hybrid tax is gone. I'm just kidding. Ladies and gentlemen, I do think that the hybrid tax, as it still stands in this bill, is flawed policy. Notwithstanding that, I intend to vote for the amendments while holding my nose. But I just want to explain it. We didn't talk a lot about the hybrid tax when this bill passed. And it's really, this policy suffers from 4 problems. And this is going to be back next year and again and again and again if it stays. First of all, taxing hybrid vehicles. It punishes people for doing the right thing. Normally we don't tax people for doing things that are virtuous. You know, Senator Eben and I put out a petition. We had 7,000 Virginians sign this petition. You will not believe the comments we got. You know, why am I being taxed for doing the right thing? We had people asking us, what's next? We're going to be taxing vegetables? Somebody going to say that I'm not paying my fair share of tobacco taxes, we need to tax non-smokers? We're going to tax shoes to make sure we get the pedestrians? Or maybe we are taxing shoes now that we're doing the sales tax to fund roads. But, Mr. Speaker, this is not, this hybrid tax takes us down a road that we've never been before. The second problem with this is that this tax bears no actual relationship to what it purports to. The rationale we were given is that we are somehow asking hybrid drivers to make up for gas taxes they're not paying. The average vehicle sold in the United States vehicle fleet last year in 2012 got 23.9 miles a gallon. Now, if you take the most environmentally friendly, greenest hybrid, one that only, say, Delegate Lopez or Hope might drive, that gets, say, 45 miles a gallon. If you drive 15,000 miles with that car, it gets you'll use 333 gallons of gas in a year. The average car sold last year would get 627 gallons. If you multiply that times this new gas tax we have of 12 cents a gallon, Lopez and Hope are only skipping out, folks, on about $35 a year. Now, for the privilege of skipping out on $35 a year, you got to pay $65. $64. That doesn't make any sense, and it punishes people, again, for doing the right thing, for doing the right thing for our communities, for doing the right thing for public health, for doing the right thing for energy independence. It doesn't make any sense. The third problem is that hybrid owners already pay their fair share of taxes. The average hybrid car costs about 10% more to purchase. You pay a higher vehicle titling tax when you buy it. You pay a higher personal property tax when you buy it because we don't phase it out for any vehicle worth less than $20,000. You also pay if you want to drive on the HOV lanes an extra $25 a year for a special license plate already, $25 a year. Hybrid owners are already being taxed twice, 2 times, 3 times, taxed more already, paying their fair share for what they're not paying in gas taxes. And the last thing I'll say is this policy, folks, is not rational in another way, because there are many other vehicles that get better mileage than hybrids, but we're not adding on the fee to them. The 2012 GMC Yukon hybrid gets 21 miles a gallon. Yet we're asking that vehicle to pay a $64 tax. We're not putting on motorcycles. We're taking it off mopeds. We're not having bicycles. Those freeloading bicyclists pay their fees for riding on our roads. I don't want to give you any ideas. But, folks, once we go down this road of picking on one specific technology, it loses its rationality. It doesn't make sense. And that's why 7,000 people signed a petition, because they feel picked on. Now, having said that, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the governor listening to us. I appreciate the governor. We actually delivered those petitions to him, and I believe he actually read them based on what his staff told me, and I think he heard what the people of Virginia said, and that's why he proposed to lower this hybrid fee, and we appreciate that. And in light of what he's done, I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to vote for this bill. I'm the only one on this side of the aisle who voted against this bill last time. I'm voting for these amendments this time. But, Mr. Speaker, and my colleague here, I don't know what she's doing, but she stood with me last time. Hopefully she'll come with me this time. But, Mr. Speaker, this hybrid tax is something that's got to go. And we're going to be back next year. I got one more over here. But we're going to repeal this hybrid tax next year, and I hope the body will stand with me and do just that thing next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please hold your applause. The gentlewoman from Bedford, Ms. Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the amendment.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I feel like I need to rise today to speak on behalf of my constituents and people in my region that I have gone home and since heard a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of concern over some of the policies that we have passed. Although most people understand the need for monies to fix our transportation maintenance problems and some of the revenue sources that provide for our transportation needs, I think the solution was not an ideal solution or one that was manageable by many folks. I have no illusions about the end result of the debate over this amendment today. Whether or not it's approved by this House and by the other body, the main provisions of the transportation plan will become effective on July 1 of this year. I do think, however, that it's important that the members of the House fully appreciate the true implications of this amendment and the underlying plan. The facts were out there, so I'm not telling you anything new. Regardless of where you live in the Commonwealth, this legislation will take more money from your constituents. It is not revenue neutral. $1.2 billion in new revenue does not come out of thin air. When fully implemented, the tax increases included in the amendment average out to $200 more per person annually in Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia and $80 more per person in the rest of the state. Virginia's tax code has, in my view, become a jumbled mess. Sales taxes and gas taxes will soon vary wildly from region to region. This change that we have made only compounds our differing tax rates on transient occupancy, personal property, business licensing, machinery, and a progressive rated income tax. A commonwealth that once promised businesses the predictability of locating in a Dillon rule state has incrementally undermined those guarantees. Virginia's tax code is no longer on course to becoming as confusing as the federal tax code. It's already dangerously close to achieving that distinction. And while this amendment may have been written to withstand constitutional challenge, what has happened to our tax code overall contradicts the intent of Virginia's Constitution. Those of us committed to real tax reform and tax relief will need to regroup and must regroup after this happens. We have yet to fulfill a 15-year-old commitment approved with bipartisan support in this body to eliminate the car tax. And because of the decision in 2004 to place an arbitrary cap on the car tax, Virginians are seeing their car tax bills increase each year. Our state continues to have a graduated income tax, while 9 states have no tax on earned income and another 7 that do have a flat rate without brackets. We have repeatedly failed to enact protections for the Transportation Trust Fund, undermining the public's confidence in what we'll do with the funds after we collect them. We continue to have a local revenue system that encourages the collection of regressive job-killing taxes like B-Poll and the machinery and tool tax. The enactment of this amendment is going to make Virginia less affordable for the people that live here. In some areas with heavy job loss, some especially in the South Side, it will impose an even higher burden on the people that live there. Since this amendment effectively makes minor changes in the underlying bill, and because even if this amendment fails, it's highly unlikely that the governor is going to veto the bill, I hope that others will join me in looking to the future and to the challenge that is imposed upon us, and that we must evaluate our current tax code. We need to fulfill our promises to the people of Virginia by providing a fairer, simpler tax system that they can afford. And although I understand the reason behind the bill, I don't agree with the solution to the bill, and therefore I must oppose the amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Albo.
Speaker, speaking to the amendments, please.
Gentleman has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, just because, like many of you, since we've left the session on this bill, I have gotten so much email from people who don't understand or have been told things that are not even in the bill, and I've spent half my time trying to just explain to people what the facts are before we could have a debate on whether it's a good idea or not. And there's a couple things that have been referenced today which I just want to point out that I just disagree with the conclusions. First was an implication that Northern Virginia will pay more for the rest of the state's roads. It is absolutely and utterly incorrect to imply that any of this money that Northern Virginia is paying or that Hampton Roads is paying is ever going to leave the area. It's impossible. If you look at the governor's amendments, enactment number 14, he actually improved the version that we had before. The governor's new version says that any time the state uses any of the statewide money for something other than transportation, all the revenue sources disappear. And it further says that anytime any of the revenue sources in any of the planning districts, which is Hampton Road in Northern Virginia, is ever used for anything other than transportation, all the revenue sources disappear. And it also says that anytime a locality uses any of the money they get in Northern Virginia or Hampton Roads for anything that's transportation and anything that goes outside their locality, that locality forever can't get a single penny of it. This bill assures, and I hope that every constituent in this state knows, that the money that they will be paying, and granted it's going to be some more, is absolutely and utterly going to be used for transportation. The bill protects them. Secondly, I would disagree with the fact that an average family of 4 is going to pay $200 more in Northern Virginia. When I ran the numbers, and remember, this bill actually has a slightly less impact on the average citizen since the titling tax went down from 4.3 to 4.15. Let's remember that the sales tax increase does not apply to food. There is no sales tax increase on anybody when they walk into a grocery store. So the only time people will pay more is when they buy a good in Virginia. In my calculation, for a family of 4 making $140,000 that buys a $500,000 house every 20 years and one $20,000 car every 5, that family of 4 would pay about $14 or $15 more per month in Northern Virginia. Now, somebody who makes more money, has a more expensive house, and likes fancy cars like Delegate Marshall, they're going to pay more. That Marshall doesn't like good cars. So it's about my calculations are about $14 per month per family of 4, or $7 per person. And in fact, with the governor's amendments, it could be much, much less. So, and then the last thing is, nope, I don't have any more, Your Honor. I just like, Your Honor, wow.
That'd be you, Your Honor.
Yeah. But I just want to make sure that people know that there is no chance whatsoever that a single penny that is raised in this bill is ever going to go for anything but transportation. And there is no chance that a single penny that is raised in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads will ever be used for anything other than transportation or anything outside Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. Thank you. Mr. Speaker?
You got to push your little button.
Question. Oh.
The gentleman from Loudon, Mr. Greason.
Mr. Speaker, would the other gentleman from Loudon rise and let me ask him a question?
Which gentleman?
I'm sorry, Delegate May.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask the gentleman, there's been a lot of discussion about hybrid fuels and diesel fuel cars and electric cars. Can the gentleman tell me if there's going to be any effort between now and the next General Assembly session where there might be some rationalization of how all those alternative fuel cars are affected by this particular bill?
Mr. Speaker, I'd respond that it's my intent to have the Joint Commission on Transportation Accountability review the basic principles behind the taxation of the electric cars, the alternative energy cars, and, yes, the hybrid cars. But there's a long, long way from being any changes in legislation that's before us right now. I would admit that it's probably worthwhile to take a further look at it because I think we're having to change the basis under which we tax cars for use of our roadways. But that's conjecture long before we've actually looked at the issue.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman.
Fairfax, Mr. Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speak to the amendment, the substitute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I wish I could write a transportation bill that would get 100 votes in here. You know, I've been waiting a long time to be able to vote for a bill like this. I didn't see this coming during the session until maybe the last couple weeks. I really want to thank everybody who voted for this and worked for this. This is the #1 business bill that you'll ever vote on. This is it. This is what helps Virginia, and I appreciate particularly every person from a rural area who may not see a direct impact because we're taxing ourselves to build our own infrastructure in these 2 regions where we need it. We gave up long ago on the idea that around the state that people will help us get out of our problems in Northern Virginia where all the money comes from. So in my county, Mr. Speaker, 25% of the income taxes we collect are from Fairfax County alone. 25% of the income taxes in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so now, and this is not a new thought, we did this in 2007, didn't work. But we came back to it 6 years later, we finally got it, we finally passed this bill. This is our chance to repass it. I wouldn't have done some of these amendments the governor did. But some of the talk I've heard today about is really in the category of nitpicking if there ever was one. If there's a bill that when we get a fiscal impact statement that everyone agrees to, then they'll vote for the bill, please. Or that these are going to be hard taxes to implement. Well, I wouldn't have taken the per gallon tax off of gasoline, so we're going to switch that. But most of these are already in place. These are not going to be expensive to implement, these new fees. A poll was just done. Virginians support this bill. So vote for it today. Take your most pro-business vote of your career. This is the bill for a generation. Vote aye. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman Prince William, Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Speaker, would the gentleman from Fairfax yield for a question, the chairman of the Courts Committee?
Gentleman
Yes,
yields.
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Speaker, I was a co-patron with the gentleman on his calculator bill. And in his statement, he indicated that it's $7 per person and a family of 4 pays $14 a month. Now, the way that I calculate 4 times 7 is 28, not 14. Would the gentleman like to explain that answer of his?
I would be happy to, because while I was sitting here, I found the chart that I was looking for, and I was trying to go off memory. In Northern Virginia, a family of 4 making $140,000, using projections by the United States Department of Agriculture on how much someone spends on food, and estimates from the IRS on how much an average family of 4 spends on goods. The additional amount spent in sales tax per year is $83. The additional amount spent on a home, if you sell a home, $500,000 every 30 years is $41. The additional amount spent on a car titling tax is $52, and then you save $87.50 in gas tax. So the total amount spent by an average family of 4 making $140,000 in Northern Virginia is $89.77. And that means that each adult in the family will be paying $3.74 more per month. So those are the exact statistics, and I'm really glad you asked that question, because I knew the Speaker wouldn't call on me again to correct.
Mr. Speaker, further question?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
And yields.
The gentleman is consulting sources that are outside the purview and scope of the Virginia legislature. When I look at the narrative here, I only see an indication in the public record of 2 fiscal impact statements, one in the middle of January and the other on the 4th of February. This is the 3rd of April. How is someone in the public on whose behalf we're voting and taking money out of pocket, you are, not me, going to find out what the impact of this is? And especially disturbing is the recalculation from 25 cents per 100 down to 15 cents per 100 was based on what? It seems that the amount of money is the same, but the rate had to be dropped to achieve the same amount of money. So how are we to have confidence that, in fact, all these calculations are correct when I'm a legislator and I can't even find it here? And what I really resent, this was not the gentleman's fault, was the day that we got the original conference report, I could not send it to anybody, but lobbyists in Northern Virginia with law firms who were in favor of this were able to send it to their friends. So how is the public, who can't access official sources, supposed to have confidence that, in fact, the representations made are in fact accurate?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I answered the gentleman's question over a couple of things that you were complaining about. I guess are pretty legit. I mean, they should have it, fiscal impact, up online by now. I wouldn't fault you for that argument, but I don't work at the DPB. What I did was got on the internet, and in about 5 minutes, the gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Lemonnier, and I found the United States Department of Agriculture figures. We found the United States, the IRS figures, and we figured it out on our own. Now, granted, he's a math guy, I'm not, but these figures are open to the public. They are available databases. If I can figure it out, anybody can, and it comes out to $3.74 per month per person in Northern Virginia. And so those facts and figures can be found by any constituent if they wanted to spend the time to do it.
Further question, Mr. Speaker?
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you. The gentleman disagreed with the statement, and I think I'm the only one who made it, that in fact we'll be paying more for roads in Northern Virginia than elsewhere. But I made that based on the fact that in Northern Virginia, we'll be paying a tax of 6% to achieve a service level of transportation. Others in Virginia will be paying 5.3% to achieve a similar service level for transportation. How is that not paying more to achieve the same service level of transportation? And instead of sharing, because the gentleman was here and he knows that the bill from the other gentleman from Fairfax about increasing the number of representatives from Northern Virginia and Tidewater on the CTB was reduced, and the gentleman also knows about representations or agreements that there won't be any change in the funding formula. So how are we, in fact, not paying more when on the surface of it, the tax went up 0.7% in Northern Virginia and only 0.3% elsewhere in Virginia?
Let me answer the gentleman. I'm glad you explained yourself, because I thought what you were saying is that Northern Virginia was paying for other people's roads, which they are not, pursuant to my explanation of Enactment 14 that makes sure that all the money stays in Northern Virginia. The reason that people in Northern Virginia are going to pay more is because they're going to get $350 million more per year in new roads, tunnels, bridges, and mass transit. The reason this bill works is because for the rest of the state, they just don't have a transportation construction problem. And they are not interested in paying new taxes and fees to build roads they don't need. We who live up in Northern Virginia, and any of us who've traveled through Northern Virginia, and any of us who tried to go to the beach or back, know that in Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia is dramatically different. Dramatically different. And my constituents have indicated to me for years now that they are willing to pay more, if and only if, under the one non-negotiable rule that shall never be broken, that all their money stays in their neighborhood to pay for roads that they need.
One last question.
Gentleman yields.
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Is it not correct that the other monies that the localities get is fungible, and so therefore the money can really be shifted when in fact an accounting entry on a book would indicate that it's not, but in fact other monies will be shifted? And how does the gentleman get around that?
Well, that statement I asked the gentleman is not correct. And the reason that's not correct is because we thought of that. And what we've done is said that every locality has to maintain the same level of effort prior to this bill for transportation. So if a county is spending X prior to July 1st, then they have to be spending X on transportation after July 1st. And so that way you maintain the same level of effort. Thus, all the money has to be used. The other great thing is the gentlelady from Fairfax ingeniously thought, I thought, that she requires in the bill, and I can't remember where it is, that every local government has to have a separate line item for all the money they get through this program so they can prove to us that 100% of the money was spent on transportation.
Mr. Speaker, one more question.
No. You said that was your last one.
Well, he can't trust me, so.
I yield, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields.
And, Mr. Speaker, the reason I asked the question is because of the information he presented there. In Prince William County, for years now, we have undertaken projects to pay for, with bonds, projects that VDOT has not funded. So I would suggest to you that we have a higher ratio of spending on transportation than other localities do in Northern Virginia. In fact, in 1989, I was part of a project that succeeded in getting a bond passed to build a road across the county without any stoplights. So are you suggesting now that Prince William County, which has had a much higher ratio of investment in roads, has to maintain that level in order to get this money? Because if we do, I think that's particularly unfair for Prince William, which was spending more per dollar raised in taxes than Fairfax was on transportation. So if they back away from this high level of spending versus Fairfax's lower level of spending, that's a penalty that's being imposed on them simply because they exceeded the average state ratio. Is that fair?
Well, I asked the gentleman that you have an internal consistency in your arguments from the last question to this question. The last question you said that you were upset with people using the money you get from this bill to pay for things other than transportation. The solution is to make sure that people maintain the same level of effort on transportation. So Prince William, after this year, will have to spend the same general amount of money on transportation it does so that we can be assured that all the new money they get builds roads and rail. Now, I know Arlington spends a lot of its money on transportation. I know that Fairfax does. I assume that Alexandria, I'm not familiar with the Alexandria budget. So everybody's doing what they can right now. And Prince William did not impose a previous grant of a commercial industrial tax on land. What they did was they decided to use other sources. So Prince William is doing a good job with what they have now. I would argue that so is Loudoun, Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria.
Thank you. Shall the bill be amended in accordance with the recommendations of the governor? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 62, noes 36.
Ayes 62, noes 36. The amendments are agreed to.